In this video, I'd like to discuss a way to give Playblast a more finished look. I have here a rigged character from Advanced Skeleton. This is a rigging system that we use at Becker College for both character animation and character rigging. It's a really great system. You can find it online if you just type in a search for Advanced Skeleton. So the first thing we want to do if we're working with a character, now the system or the procedures I'm going to show here don't need to be used with characters. These can be used with anything that you do a Playblast of. So with Advanced Skeleton though, we have a very handy window here where we can do or control a lot of different components related to this specific animation system. So if I click on this little window here, it brings up a control window, and from here I can go to display and just turn the controls off. We don't want to see those controls when we render our Playblast. Our Playblast will render everything that it sees in the viewport. Now, if you're using your own system or something like that, or something different I should say, then you'll probably want to go to the Show menu and you can turn specific objects on or off here. Again, we just want to see our animated object without any other clutter. So then the next thing we need to do is we need to put down a ground plane because we want to catch shadows. So I'm going to come up to the Create menu and I'm going to create a polygon primitive plane. It's very small here in the scene, so I'm going to make it a little bit, or I should say a lot larger. So I'm going to come in here to the channel box and I will come down here to the inputs where it says polyplane, and I can change the height and width to a fairly large number, maybe 50 by 50, or I might even want to go larger than that. So let's, again, what I'm doing here is just clicking and dragging to select both of these attributes at the same time. Let's go with 100. So we make a nice large ground plane there. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a light in the scene. Now we can work with the Arnold lighting system here, these lights, or for Playblast I find that the regular Maya lights tend to be a little more intuitive and easy to work with. So I'm going to go to the Maya lights and I'm going to choose an area light. All these up here are RenderMan lights because I have RenderMan installed also. You probably won't have those if you don't have RenderMan installed. So I like to use an area light because an area light is large, or I can make it large and it will give me nice soft shadows. So I'm going to choose area light and it places an area light here at the origin. So I'm just going to move this up and into place over here. So I'm going to put it up at sort of a 45-degree angle above the character. And let's go up a little bit higher and rotate it down a little bit. Now, of course, I could position this light by going to the Panels menu and doing Look Through Selected. That might be an easier way to position the light, but in this case, I just positioned it manually. So if I tell the viewport to use this light, it's still not going to look quite right. I mean, we see that it's not using the light right now. And I am using viewport 2.0. So what I need to do is I need to go to the lighting menu here and tell it not to use default lighting, but to use all the lights I have in the scene. So I'll select that, and now the scene gets fairly dark. I might also want to turn off the grid. That's in the way, and that would render as well because we can see it. So I'll go to the Show menu and turn the grid off, which is down here. And then I can increase my light's intensity. I can do this from the channel box, or I can do this from the attribute editor. I'll go to the attribute editor and just increase its intensity. Now as I increase that, we see that it's not casting shadows, and that's a very important element for creating a finished look. So we need to take one more step from the lighting menu here, and we have to tell it to cast shadows. So I'll activate that as well. And now I get a nice shadow there. So the next thing that I want to take a look at is the background. I don't like this hard contrast between the ground plane and the background color. So what I like to do is just change the background color to black also. So the way we do that is from the Windows menu. It's a preference. So we're going to go to Settings, Preferences, and it's a color setting. So I'm going to go to the color settings. And in here, I'm going to go to the 3D views, and right there is the background color. So if I change that to black, we see how much it brings more unity to the viewport. as opposed to when I have it like this, it really separates everything. So I like to set that to black. Now this is gonna give me a fairly dark rendering, but again, to create a nice finished Playblast just for visualization purposes, this is a great way to work. So I'm gonna set the background color to black and save that. And now the next thing I need to think about is the indirect areas. I mean, it is dark, but I think it's a little too dark. So I could place our very special ambient light in the scene. This is another Maya standard light, but that has a tendency to really flatten out or wash out the viewport. Even if I lower the intensity, that can help, and that might do the trick for you, just lowering the intensity. Now, the problem we have though is it illuminates all of that ground plane, and I like that ground plane to fade away into the background. So that's why I don't like to use an ambient light. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And what I'm going to do is the old-fashioned way of just painting light into the scene. I'm going to add more rectangular lights with lower intensities and not casting shadows, and just have them fill in the indirect areas. So I'll go back to the Create menu, Lights, and I'll add another area light. So I have another area light here, and you can see as I move it around, it illuminates a certain part of the scene. Now you'll see it's casting a shadow right there. So what I'm going to do is tell it under shadows here to not cast shadows. They cast ray trace shadows by default, so I'll turn that off. And now it doesn't cast a shadow. And I can place it sort of over here, point it up a little bit so it starts to fill in these darker areas. And I want to be really careful with where I place it so that I don't get this kind of or not shadowing, but illumination on the ground. I don't want to reveal that there's actually another light here. I want it to just feel like it's bounced light in the scene. So we have to be kind of careful where we place these. So see, as I bring it up, it doesn't cast directly onto the floor now. And then that way I can keep it from feeling like there's actually a light source over here. And then I can adjust its intensity a little bit if I need to, just to fill in that indirect area. Now I might want to bring it this way a little bit and then rotate it. I'm going to actually switch my rotation to the world coordinate. What I did is I just double clicked on the rotate tool and it brings up the tool settings, and I can change my orientation to world. Then that way it maintains its angle, but I can rotate it just straight around the y-axis. So I can fill in that indirect area a little bit more. So you see, I just sort of play with the placement of this. So I can add more of these to paint light into the scene. But we can see that gives me a much better look than if I had default lighting. This is what it would look like normally. So again, I do use all lights and I have shadows on. It gives me a much better look. Now, some other things that we might want to take into account before we do our Playblast is we want to increase the anti-aliasing. You'll notice that there's a little bit of a jagged edge here. So the way we do that is from the rendering menu. And I'm going to open up the options for viewport 2.0. So if I open this up, I can scroll down here to anti-aliasing and turn on multi-sample anti-aliasing. And I don't know if you can see it in the video, but when I toggle that on and off, it gets rid of the jagged edge. It makes it nice and smooth. And then we might also want to add some screen space ambient occlusion. This will add a little bit of shadowing right where surfaces meet each other. So if I enable that, you can see how I get a shadow right there around the feet. And by default, I think it's usually a little too large. So I'm going to bring the radius down. We see the radius can change there. And I can also change the amount if I don't want quite so much. But it's nice because it fills in some shadowing in these really small spaces where our lights don't really give us any shadowing. So those are the two things that I add here in the hardware 2.0 settings. And then the last thing we have to consider are light sources. Again, anything in the viewport will render. So I want my lights to illuminate, but I don't want to see them. So I can't come over here to the channel box and turn off their visibility. That will turn off their illumination. But if I come over here to the show menu for the viewport and I turn the lights off, it just turns off their visibility. It doesn't turn off their illumination. and now I don't see them if they happen to be in the camera's view when I do my Playblast. So that's what we discussed in class on making a Playblast look more finished. And now, of course, I would just generate my Playblast, which is a window. So I would go to the Windows menu and generate my Playblast from there. And whatever we see in the scene, however it looks, that's exactly what we're going to get in our Playblast rendering.